The Atlantic slave trade was the largest forced movement of people across the Atlantic in history. For centuries, men, women, and children were seized in Africa, sold at the coast, loaded onto ships, carried across the Atlantic, and forced into labor in the Americas. Millions were dragged into it. Many died before they ever reached the places where others planned to use them. What made this history so devastating was not scale alone. It was the logic behind it. Human beings could be priced, insured, shipped, sold, worked, and replaced inside an Atlantic trading world where profit was enough to excuse almost anything. This was not only cruelty, it was business. The ships mattered. The plantations mattered. The ports, merchants, investors, and states mattered too. To tell this story honestly, it has to be told as a whole system. Before they were counted as cargo, they were already living full human lives. They were sons and daughters, parents and spouses, farmers, fishers, traders, artisans, laborers, soldiers, and children, growing up inside communities shaped by language, memory, hierarchy, and place. They belonged to societies across West and West Central Africa long before Atlantic merchants reduced them to property for sale. That matters because the word slave can flatten the story if it arrives too early. Those taken were not born for shipholds or plantation fields. They had names before they were renamed. They had obligations before they were owned. They had futures before those futures were broken open by force. The Atlantic slave trade did not create these lives. It interrupted them, seized them, and tried to turn them into property. The trade expanded because powerful interests across the Atlantic found it useful. Plantation economies in the Americas demanded labor because crops like sugar and tobacco, and later cotton, brought huge profits. Colonists, merchants, and investors wanted workers they could control as cheaply and as completely as possible. Ship owners, traders, financiers, and imperial states all had reasons to keep bodies moving across the ocean. Trade routes linked Europe, Africa, and the Americas in a repeating commercial chain. European goods moved toward African coasts. Captives were forced toward Atlantic shipping points. Plantation produce and mineral wealth moved outward again. On parts of the African coast, trade goods, and especially firearms, intensified bargaining, rivalry, and violence. The cruelty was not random. It grew because the rewards were high, the demand kept rising, and too many people with wealth and power had an interest in keeping the trade alive. That demand reached actual human lives through violence close to home. People entered the trade in different ways. Some were taken in raids, some were seized in war, some were kidnapped, some were pulled into slave trading networks through local systems bent and enlarged by Atlantic demand. Captives were forced from inland regions toward the coast in chains, often over long distances, under conditions many did not survive. At forts and coastal holding points, human beings were confined, inspected, sorted, and bargained over before being sold into an Atlantic market already waiting for them. African participation in this process was real, and any honest account has to say so. But it was not the whole structure. The trade became as large as it did because local capture, coastal exchange, European shipping, plantation demand, and imperial commerce locked together. Without that wider structure, the scale would not have become what it was. Some African rulers saw the danger clearly. In the 16th century, Afonso I of Congo wrote to the Portuguese crown complaining that traders were taking free people from his kingdom and tearing his society apart. His protest matters because it shows that the violence of the trade was not hidden from everyone. Even while some profited from it, others could already see the damage it was doing. The middle passage was the crossing where captivity became organized degradation. Below deck, people were confined in heat, stench, sickness, thirst, fear, and suffocating air. Chained into spaces designed to carry as many bodies as possible, not to preserve human dignity. Many had little idea where they were being taken. Some believed they were being carried toward death. Some tried to refuse food. Some tried to throw themselves into the sea. Olaudah Equiano later described being forced below deck into a place so foul and crowded that he became sick almost immediately and wished for death instead. Testimony like that matters because it cuts through distance and abstraction. The crossing was not simply movement across water. It was terror, disorientation, punishment, disease, and calculated coercion. Crews used force to keep people alive long enough to be sold. Many died in the passage. But even survival was not rescue. Survival meant arrival at the point where the trade intended to use them. On the far side of the Atlantic, people were sold again. Bodies were inspected, priced, sorted, and assigned according to what buyers believed they could extract from them. The great majority were sent to the Caribbean and Brazil, where plantation labor absorbed enormous numbers of enslaved Africans. Others were forced into mines, households, workshops, and other forms of colonial labor. British North America was part of this history, but it was not most of it. Everywhere, the rule was the same. A person's value was measured by how much labor could be taken from them. Families could be split apart at sale. Work was relentless. Punishment was ordinary. Injury, sexual abuse, exhaustion, and early death were built into the regime. The trade also reached into the next generation. Children born to enslaved women could inherit enslaved status, allowing exploitation to continue through birth as well as purchase. The crossing had not delivered people out of danger. It had delivered them into the trade's purpose. A system this profitable could not survive by force alone. It also needed ways to defend itself. Religious arguments, legal categories, racial thinking, and property law helped make domination appear permissible to the societies that benefited from it. Human beings had to be made to seem less than fully human, so that sale, punishment, forced labor, and inherited status could be treated as ordinary parts of economic life. Over time, the language hardened. Difference became hierarchy. Hierarchy became doctrine. What had to be defended in practice was then defended in law and in ideas. These arguments did more than explain the trade. They helped protect it. They helped keep conscience from interrupting commerce. They helped powerful societies explain why some lives could be bought, disciplined, inherited, and spent in the service of wealth. The trade never moved forward without resistance. Resistance took many forms. Revolt on ships, escape from plantations, sabotage, refusal, survival, testimony, and the preservation of self under conditions designed to erase it. Enslaved people were not passive matter inside this history. They fought it in ways large and small, visible and hidden. Resistance also changed the Atlantic world politically. In Saint-Domingue, Toussaint Louverture emerged from slavery to become one of the central leaders of the Haitian Revolution, the most successful slave revolt in modern history. His importance is not just symbolic. He stands as proof that the people trapped inside this system were not only its victims, they were also among its most determined challengers. Opposition to the trade also widened over time. Britain abolished its slave trade in 1807 and slavery in most of its empire in 1833. The United States ended slavery in 1865. Brazil ended it in 1888. But the ending was uneven, and it came late. Illegal trafficking continued. Formal abolition did not restore the dead, reunite the broken. or undo the racial order and economic damage that centuries of organized exploitation had already deepened. The trade ended in law before it ended in consequence. Atlantic slave trade reveals more than the existence of cruelty. It reveals what becomes possible when commerce, empire, law, and power all agree that human beings can be turned into value. Ports prospered, plantations expanded, merchants, investors, and states accumulated wealth. But that growth was tied to forced transport, broken kinship, bodily destruction, demographic damage, and the long hardening of racial hierarchy across the Atlantic world. This was not a tragic side effect of trade. It was one of the ways Atlantic wealth and power were built. The ships carried people, but they also carried a truth that outlived them. Entire systems can be organized around human degradation when enough profit depends on it. And the damage such systems leave behind does not end when the ship stops sailing.